Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Muslim CEO show. This is the place for you if you want to become an amazing leader and grow yourself or your business to the next level. We do this by learning from those that have been there, done it and bought the thobe. I'm your brother and host Mohammad Arshad, and today I am honored to have with me the amazing Dr. Bilal Phillips. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Sheikh, I'm super excited to have you on the show because I believe that you're a true master of inspiration and leadership. And there's so much I believe we can learn from you and from your journey, inshallah.
Inshallah, I hope everybody will be able to take some lessons and learn from my mistakes. And, whatever I did right that was beneficial, that they would be able to take that home.
Inshallah. So Sheikh, I just want to give a very quick introduction. I really believe that you're one of those people. I'm sure that Muslims around the world, like almost all the Muslims, will see your face and they'll recognize you. But just to give a quick overview, so Dr. Bilal Phillips is a Jamaican-Canadian Islamic scholar. He accepted Islam in the 70s. That's like the 1970s, mashallah, right? He went on to study Islam in Bayyinah University. He did the BA in Islamic Studies, and then he also did a Master's in Islamic Theology from Riyadh. He also did a PhD, which makes him an official doctor from the University of Wales. He's written over 50 books. He's been on loads of TV channels. He's been teaching for decades. And he's also the founder and dean of the pioneering, and I say pioneering because they were the first Islamic Online University. So, Sheikh, Jazakallah khair for joining me today. I'm really excited, like I said, to have you on board because I think you've had such a long journey, and what I'm hoping is to share a lot of the wisdom that you have, because there's a big difference between knowledge and wisdom, and I'm hoping that we're going to extract lots of wisdom from you. But the first question I want to ask you, Sheikh, which we didn't tell you, it's like a private question, we just kind of pounce it on you, right, is what was 10-year-old Bilal like?
Well, 10-year-old Bilal was a non-Muslim kid,
okay,
who had just migrated to Canada from Jamaica with his parents, going to high school in Toronto with a very undiversified school body, children. I was like the only black kid in the whole school. A school of maybe, over 1,000 kids. So you can imagine the mental challenges that were there to adjust into Canadian society at that time. But that was me there, obviously not thinking about Islam. That was the farthest thing from my mind. It was just about survival. How do you survive in this environment? Adjusting to life in Canada.
And what kind of brought you to Canada? Like you're originally from Jamaica, you were born there, you lived your early life there. What kind of brought you to Canada in those days?
My parents, they were studying in university in Toronto, University of Toronto. Both of them were studying, doing their higher degrees. And they brought me, my brother and sister, along with me, to Canada with them. They had made the intention of hijrah, basically. That was their hijrah.
Yeah. Okay. And what was life like for you, Sheikh? Because this is the early 70s. Like you said, it wasn't a very diverse community. Like being a teenager in Canada, what was it like? Very different to today, I suppose.
Well, don't connect the two. When you're talking about early 70s, that's when I converted to Islam.
Okay, good. Yeah.
When I came to Canada at the age of 10, that was like 1957.
Wow. Okay.
So it's
even more different.
20 years difference between the two.
So what was Canada like in that time? Because there's a lot of Muslims in Toronto now. What was it like at that time?
Very few. When I converted in 1972, there were only 2 mosques in the whole city of Toronto. Muslims were small numbers. The major mosque, which is called Bousted Avenue Mosque, we used to that mosque was actually controlled by Guyanese immigrants, who were Muslim in culture, and who had the mosque as a cultural club, where they had keys to the mosque, and if you were not a part of that culture, then you didn't get a key. So, so those were the days where you would come and knock on the door of the mosque and nobody opened it. You didn't come in the set times that they've fixed, so that was a whole challenge, in those days. But alhamdulillah, I learned from the people around me who were themselves immigrants, either from Pakistan or India, Bangladesh, Egypt, Morocco. This was the community, was a mix of people from North Africa as well as from Indo-Pakistan subcontinent. Yeah.
So Sheikh, what kind of sparked your interest in Islam? Because you said there weren't that many Muslims at that time. Like you said, this was the late 60s, maybe early 70s when you started getting interested. What kind of sparked it? How did you kind of get to that position?
Well, what happened is that I was in Toronto at that time, but 1972, university student, disgruntled with the status quo, where Canada was providing napalm bombs for America to drop on the Vietnamese.
Right.
There was a student rebellion against this arrangement with the U.S. I had gone into communism, at that time it was ripe for communist ideas to spread. There had been an earlier communist influx way back in the 30s and all this, but this was a new time where the communist ideas were absorbed by the Black Power movement in the U.S., and its effects in Canada, on a weaker level. So I was caught up in that communist thought, communist party or communist movement, and looking to change the world, wanting to change the world, to make it a better place for human beings, This was what communism promised, and that's what I bought into. But after, being in that movement for some years, I came to understand, from studying the history and all these other things, that it really wasn't the answer. Communism couldn't compete with capitalism, when it came down on an economic level. And if it was so good, why couldn't it compete? Why couldn't it meet the challenges and surpass? China today has done that. They've met the challenges, but they're not communism anymore. That's after they left communism and absorbed and adopted, capitalist ideas, that they were able to compete. So there was obviously something fundamentally wrong with communist ideology. There was something, not right. Something needed to be corrected, and reality is that, of course, communism was purely an economic kind of rationale, whereas human beings are more than just economics. It's not just about empty stomachs and full stomachs struggling with each other. There is something beyond that. There will always be empty and full, no matter what system that you set up. No matter how egalitarian and equalizing a system you put in place, there will always be some who have and some who don't have. That's just how human society is. So it needed a system which would address all of these, disparaging relationships. And it didn't have the answer. So, I was open Of course, I didn't find Islam myself. There was, an individual who had come up with the draft dodgers who were fleeing America so that they didn't have to end up in Vietnam. Some of them were Muslim converts, and they gravitated politically towards the kind of organizations I was involved in. They were trying to give some dawah. They did affect a few people. Some people accepted Islam, and that's what opened up my eyes and caused me to say, well, okay, what is this? Religion is supposed to be the opium of the masses. So, what's going on here, right? You guys are, apostates, renegades, So anyway, that's what really, it caught me at the right time, seeing that transition that take place, and attracted me to want to investigate further. And upon investigation and discussion and reading, and alhamdulillah, it didn't take very much for me to be convinced, at that point, because you could say I was ready. I mean, I had read back years before, when I was in university in West Coast, Canada, I had read the autobiography of Malcolm X. It was like required reading, but it was read like the way we read Marx and Engels, and it's more ritualistic rather than really getting into and understanding the things that were involved. So I mean, Malcolm X's story just went over my head. I didn't catch the Islam that was there at that time. And I even had gone down to the US at one point, and visited some of the local mosques, which were called temples. This was really the Elijah Muhammad movement, right? And I was impressed by their discipline, how they carried themselves in a disciplined way, and, their personal discipline. But the theology was just so out to lunch, there was no way I could swallow it, of course. And of course, it wasn't Islam, which makes sense, it just wasn't Islam. So that time in 72 was the right time for me. And Allah brought it, to me. And alhamdulillah, I was able to accept it.
Alhamdulillah. Amazing. Like, if you just think about the time that you were living in, it was an amazing time, I think. Shaykh, I want to ask you, how do you make the decision to go from someone who's just kind of accepted Islam, and then a lot of people stop there. They accept Islam and they just kind of take a break and they just live their life. But you decided to go down this education path, right? Why did you decide to go across the world and to a country you've never been? What was the thinking and the motivations for you to seek that knowledge and actually do more than just be a Muslim in everyday life?
Necessity is the mother of invention.
Okay.
After I had accepted Islam in Toronto, trying to learn what Islam I could there, realizing that the immigrant Muslims, they were not scholars, they were just average everyday Muslims with whatever level of understanding they had from their cultural Islamic experience. That left me, and the others. And I should mention here that the brother who had the greatest effect for me to come into Islam from was Dr. Abdullah Hakim Quick, right?
Wow, okay.
He was the one who had come up from the US, along with others, and was giving the dawah. So you could say, I accepted Islam from him. Wow. at his hand, inshallah. But as I was saying, he and I, he had a studious background himself, and he had we were looking, trying to find some knowledge, and we just couldn't find anything. We were getting a lot of garbled understandings from the various cultures of the people around us. I went off with Jamaat Tabligh to the UK. I was told at the time that there were over 50 mosques in the UK. And that was like amazing. Why? UK, 50 mosques. And in every mosque, there was a Maulana who was ready to teach you. So I said, okay, this is where I need to be. I need to understand this thing from, the source, from a scholarship level, not from the common masses who would be telling me contradictory things. So I went to the UK. I spent the 4 months, the full Monty, as they say, right? Of Jamaat Tabligh. I did it the 4 months, and I went to all the masjids. Well, it's not all 50, but the major ones in Birmingham, in London, in Sheffield, and the major cities. I went and I sat with the local imam, who was a Maulana, and I had my notebooks with me, and I just took notes. I asked them questions, they answered the questions, and I made my notes. And I built my basic, you could say, first level scholarly understanding from that 4-month experience. After coming back, I shared that with the others, what I had learned. But I found that after returning to Canada and being more attached to the masjid, I moved to another masjid. Instead of Boston Avenue, I went to another one called the East End Mosque. And the imam there was Egyptian. And he was now teaching from Fiqh Sunnah, which is a kind of a although people say it's Shafi'i, it maybe leans towards Shafi'i madhab, but it was, it brought the evidences and gave different views. So after coming out of the Jamaat experience as a Hanafi, because I was also told I needed to choose a madhab, right? Because as a Muslim, you must follow one of the four. That's how it was taught. So, it was presented that Abu Hanifa was the first of the great Imams, and the Hanafi Hanafi madhab was the most widely followed. The greater numbers of Muslims are Hanafis than the others. The others, they said, it's okay, you can follow any one of them, but you need to follow one. But the Hanafi was the best. Well, they didn't say the best, but they said the most followed.
Social proof works well.
That implies something, So anyway, I became Hanafi, at that time. So now I'm studying with this Imam from Egypt, who was basically Shafi'i, teaching Fiqh Sunnah. And I'm comparing what I'm learning from him now, which is from a book. I'm taking notes, but these notes are now systematic. Although I compared them with what I had gotten in the 4 months there in England, then I started to see certain issues come up where the idea that all the four madhabs were the same, they were equal, they're all correct, you just needed to follow one. I found places where that just didn't work. Because, on a most basic level, where the Hanafi school, what I learned from England, said that if you accidentally touch a woman, your wudu is not broken. But the Shafi'i school said that if you did touch a woman, your wudu is broken. Now, how can both of these be correct at the same time? Not possible. So this was contradictory differences. Variational differences I could understand. Prophet ﷺ did this at one time, did that at another time. That's okay. But contradictory differences, that didn't work. So I realized it was necessary for me to go elsewhere. And at that point, Abdullah Hakim, he was doing his own searching through the books which were available in North America. At that time, 2 scholarships became available from Medina, and nobody was interested in them.
Wow.
In the community there. Nobody. Now today, if you said there's 2 scholarships available, people would be fighting each other, cutting limbs, and to get those 2 scholarships. Then nobody was interested. So Abdullah and myself, we said, we'll take it. No, people would say, no, don't go. Don't waste your time. You're going to go study these old books which are covered in dust and yellow papers, and this stuff is just totally irrelevant. You will not be able to live a life after that. You're going to be unable to sustain your own families and this kind of thing. Huge discouragement. But we were both committed. We understood that we had to go. There was no ifs, ands, and buts about this.
Amazing.
We had to go to get the knowledge from the sources, to know what Islam really was. Because if we were left to just go with whatever, our cultural Muslim compatriots, were going to tell us, we'll be here, there, up, down, left, right, all over the place. It would just be chaos for us. So we understood there was no other option. We needed to go. So that necessity invented Abdullah Hakim Quick and myself.
Amazing. And when you say scholarship, does that mean that the Medina University, they paid for your travel and they like set you up over there? And then what did it mean to have a scholarship at that time?
Well, at this time, what you just said, it meant. But at that time, it meant a ticket over there. And if you lived on the university campus, then it meant food and a stipend, and you're taken care of. But we brought families.
Oh, wow, okay.
And we couldn't, live on campus. We lived on campus until our families came. That was for maybe about 4 or 5 months. Our families came.
Right.
Sheikh bin Baz approved for us to bring our families, and we brought them. So we had to go into the city, and they didn't give us extra money as married with family. We had to go with the same thing that those on campus did. So it meant we had to struggle now to survive in that circumstance. But it was a scholarship nonetheless. It didn't cost us anything to study in the university, but to live there as a family in the city, it was tough. We went through quite rough times, Even on campus in those days, though they had just built some new buildings for housing for the students, etc. When we went there, we went into the old buildings, which were quite primitive. I mean, when I describe this to people, they're just shocked, but I won't go into all those details here. But it was just enough to say it was very primitive in those days.
So, Sheikh, when you go through something like that, where you're trying to do the right thing, you're trying to do something good for yourself and for benefit of others, and then you end up in a situation where you're struggling and it's tough and your family, and how do you get through a situation like that, especially when you're much younger as well?
Well, we sat together. We used to get together and discuss our issues and our problems. And, we agreed that this is how we would do it. We were at that time basically 4 of us from the West. There are a couple of German brothers, but their situation was more taken care of in that, they're white, German, European who came. So people were more ready to accept the responsibility of ensuring that their presence there was comfortable.
Yeah.
So they provided special housing and stuff for them with their families. Whereas us coming from North America, you know, we're Afro-Americans, Afro-Canadian. We look like the other Africans that are coming over, and they survive, you know, however they do it. So we were just sort of expected to survive similarly. Of course, for us, it was a struggle. But alhamdulillah, you know, we did get some help, came out through the group. We came together. There was, I said, 4 of us, myself, Abdullah Hakim Quick, a brother Mus'ab from Trinidad, and another brother from Philadelphia, you know, brother Nafia Mohammad, who was imam of a community there. He had some contacts in Saudi Arabia because he was there in Philadelphia where a lot of Arabs and that came through, some from Saudi Arabia or connected with Saudi Arabia came through. So he had some contacts. He was able to contact them, and we got some help with our housing situation. So by banding together, encouraging each other when we were low, whatever, you know, we said we'd sit and discuss these things. You know, when we felt like dropping out, quitting and all these things, we'd get together, you know, share the ideas, knock it around amongst ourselves. And, you know, basically this camaraderie, we were able to keep each other motivated. You know, remember, what did we come for? Stay focused on the goal. You know, this other stuff is trials, which, you know, all the scholars, everybody of the past, you know, they had to sacrifice to get this knowledge. So this is the sacrifice that we have to pay. We just have to, you know, roll with the punches, as they say, or, you know, ride the waves. You know, there are good times, bad times. So we just had to work out strategies to, you know, to be able to survive that period of study. And alhamdulillah, they worked. You know, all 4 of us basically completed our studies, mashallah. And I've gone back to the West. Everybody else, myself, I stayed over the East, and, you know, contributed to the various communities that they were connected with.
So Sheikh, tell me a little bit about like the inspirational people that you came into contact with and you studied with, and the teachers and the leaders, and who were some of the great people that really changed who you were, and what was it about them that really impressed you and that you learned from?
Well, I would say, you know, the top 2 amongst the list really were Shaykh Nasiruddin Al-Albani and his approach to the hadith being the most important element for reforming the ummah. That we need to get back to the hadith, because the problem was people had gotten away from hadith into, you know, culture, into scholastic fiqh, you know, which had lost its connection and became something else, which was not intended, you know, which led to the split up of the madhabs and, you know, the differences which occurred. And the only way to remove all of that was basically to get back to the sources, you know, and the source was the Quran and the Hadith. So the Quran everybody agreed on, and, you know, basically people would always refer to Quran. But Hadith, this was the area which was somewhat cloudy. You know, the scholarship, Hadith scholarship, had gone to a very low point, you know, by the end of the 18th century, 19th century, you know, 20th century. That period had gone to a very low point. Only a few scholars in India, you know, had kept some of this alive. You know, they continued to teach and to write, and, you know, and some in Syria, you know, some in Egypt. So there were Muslims in different areas, but it wasn't all together. It was in different. So I think Sheikh Nasir, you know, basically brought that hadith first kind of approach, after Quran, because even for the Quran, if you don't have the hadith to guide you with the Quran, then the Quran alone, you can go here, there, anywhere and everywhere, right? Hadith was the means of putting the Quranic message in its proper context, because that's the Prophet ﷺ living the Quran, he was the living version. So the hadith being his lifestyle, his sunnah, his way, then that needed to be held on to as firmly as possible, along with the Quran, of course. So he brought that element and pushed that element. There were others, around that time, at the same time, but he became I think the most notable, especially because of his writings. There maybe have been others who were more knowledgeable, like Shaykh Shanqiti, for example, who Shaykh Nasser admitted, knew more, memorized more. He could draw. His memory was, it was like IBM, computer, able to catch all that knowledge and, spit it back out in a second. But he didn't write. So if you look to see where are the writings of, Shaykh Mohammad Amin al-Shanqiti, where are his writings, you hardly find anything. He is like Ahmed ibn Hanbal, didn't write. His son wrote and others wrote, but he didn't write. But it didn't make him a lesser scholar than Imam al-Shafi'i or Imam Malik, etc. So the point is that he became a focus for me in my studies. Actually, we all gravitated towards him. I spent a lot of time, going to his lectures, etc. And his leading student in Medina, let's not say his leading student everywhere, was Shaykh Muqbil. And he had advised me, Shaykh Nasr Bani, had advised me to study takhrij of hadith with Shaykh Muqbil, because this was the skill which would give the scholar or the student of knowledge the means to distinguish between the authentic and the inauthentic, because Quran, we didn't have any issue about inauthentic, but the Sunnah, there is this issue of weak hadith, fabricated hadith, etc., etc. So that was the tool that was necessary to have been mastered and understood, to be able to make that distinction. So I studied, with Shaykh Muqbil in his home, takhrij al-hadith and so and so, So he was also, I used to attend his khutbah, because Shaykh Nasr by that time, came on occasions. He came on the Hajj, he came during Ramadan, so he was not there all the time. He had been a teacher in Medina, but by the time we got there, he had just left and had gone back to Jordan, actually. Instead of Syria, had gone to Jordan. So you could say that Shaykh Muqbil, he was there all the time. He was the Imam. He would lead the khutbah. He'd give the khutbah of Jummah and so in the what was referred to as the Harra al-Sharqiyya. This was the area outside of Medina where many of his students, Shaykh Nasr's students, gathered and studied. And Shaykh Muqbil was sort of the leading student there. So I used to go to his khutbahs regularly and listen to him. So he was an example of khataba. He was very powerful khatib. Shaykh Nasr, he was the scholar who will give you the explanation and so and so. But Shaykh Muqbil was a fiery khatib. So he was. I could say he became an example to me, of how to put ideas together, and deliver it in a way which would, reach the people. Sheikh bin Baz, was, of course, amazing. Here was a man blind, you know, who had reached this status of, he was the head of the university when I had gotten there. He was the head, mudir, or president of the university. And, you know, he would regularly give khutbas or lectures in the masjid of Medina. You know, he didn't keep himself away from the students. You know, people would always be pouring into his office. You know, he wasn't one to have a lot of blocks.
So you were saying that they keep pouring into his office.
Yeah. You know, everybody would come into his office, you know, as students, right? Before him, maybe the previous, I don't know, maybe he was the one right from the beginning, sorry. But in his time, he was accessible. This is what I could see as a classical characteristic of himself, you know, character, somebody accessible, you know, as the Prophet ﷺ was accessible, people used to come, you know, old women would hold his hand or whatever, you know, when he's walking, people, you know, he was not, he didn't have guards around him, no, you get off here, you get off here, you know, this is the Prophet here now, make way for the Prophet, no, he was accessible, you know. Sheikh bin Baz was the living example of that, of accessibility, you know. And even when he went to Riyadh, I moved to Riyadh after, he moved to Riyadh earlier and had become the main mufti of Saudi Arabia. Still, you know, that accessibility remained. You know, in his home, he would regularly have, you know, meals for anybody who would come in, you know, fill the tables, come. You know, you could always go to Sheikh bin Baz's house, Beit al-Sheikh, you know. He provided support for students when they went home, you know, to continue the dawah, you know. So he was really, you know, a very accessible person, very down to earth, very simple, you know, but at the same time, you know, a great scholar in his own right. You know, of course, he had opinions and things which differed from that of Sheikh Nasser, but they respected each other, and you know, and they both worked in their own spheres that they operated in. So, I mean, these were the big figures. I mean, there were Omar al-Fulata, for example. You know, is originally from Nigeria. Fulata from the Fulanis is known as Omar al-Fulata. He was, you know, giving lectures in the Medina Mosque, but he is a lecturer in the university itself. You know, one of the leading scholars of that time. There was Abu Bakr al-Jazairi, also, you know, who I became quite close with. I sat and listened under his lectures, etc. I mean, these were you could say, probably the biggest figures that, you know, I learned from. You know, I can say that Sheikh Abdul Muhsin Al-Abbad, you know, he was the supervisor for my BA thesis. So I learned also, he later became the president of the Islamic University of Medina. But I learned from him, and I learned how to be patient, because I remember in the first class that I took in Aqidah in the university, he was the person who taught Aqidah. Mm-hmm. And I asked questions which were questions based on what Westerners, you know, how Westerners thought, you know, the type of questions that they would ask, because I'm trying to learn from him how to handle Western thought. I'm going back to the West. So it's not enough for me to understand how you would answer a Muslim this question, you know, or somebody from the East, but how you would answer the question of a Westerner. So, and my Arabic was limited, so I wasn't able to convey to him that I'm asking this question not for myself, but for people from the West, non-Muslims, who will ask this question. When I say this, you know, they're going to ask that, you know. So, you know, the idea that when we say, you know, who created everything, it is Allah, this is, you know, Allah's characteristic of, you know, Allah is the creator of everything. And then the question that comes after that, and even children will ask this question, so who created Allah? You know? So, you know, so when I raised this question in the Aqidah class, he actually said, you have become a disbeliever.
Okay.
Kafar.
Wow.
You know, that question was a question of kufr. You know, of course it was like a boom in the head, you know. Wow. You know, but, you know, I had to be patient with it and to try to go back to him after class and sit with him and explain to him, you know, where I was coming from. You know, but I had to learn to take that. Had I not been able to take that, that would have been the end of my studies right there.
Yeah, I mean,
you know? You know, somebody calls you a kafir because you asked a question, you know, that's it, man. You know, what's the point? You know, but I had to try to figure out and understand, you know, where he was coming from. And obviously I had not effectively conveyed to him, you know, where I was actually coming from. Later on, I became his most popular student for that batch. And he used to welcome my questions because he understood now where I was coming from. And even the other students would be telling me, don't ask so many questions. You know, you're delaying the class and the course, and, you know, but he would encourage me to ask. So, you know, that was a learning point, you know, where I had to adjust and be patient, stay focused. That same point that we always give. Why were we here? We're here to get this knowledge. So it means we have to make the necessary sacrifices to get it. We don't let difficulties which are bound to arise, you know, end up ending our studies. Because many people had come before us, you know, from the people from Americas, from the West, we, Abdullah and myself, were the first two to enter into the College of Medina. Many others had come, but they didn't get farther than the Language Institute. They couldn't deal with the circumstances, you know. Yeah. Some of them were walking off the plane, and after they came to the, you know, to the terminal, they wanted to get back on the plane and get out. You know, that was it. You know, so there were many before us, and the students who were there from different parts of Africa and Asia, etc., who were our friends. You know, they would tell us about, oh, there was this guy, he came and, you know, he lasted for 10 days. Oh, that one, he lasted for 2 months. Oh, this one, he only lasted 1 day. He was back out. Wow. You know, so, you know, we were like the first pioneers. Abdullah and myself and Mohammad, Abdul Mohammad, and Mus'ab, we were the first. You know, from Europe, the couple of Germans had come, about 3. 2 stayed, 1 dropped out, went back, but 2 stayed and went through their studies also from Europe. They actually preceded us, so we could say, in terms of graduating from Medina, they were the first 2 who were from the West in its totality. We were the first 2, Abdullah and myself, from Americas, from the Americas, North, South, Central.
And you're saying so, in the history of Medina, like?
Yeah, we
Wow.
were the first. Yeah, yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
Alhamdulillah. I mean, Sheikh, this is like inspiring stuff, and you know we can only like hear the stories and imagine like the sacrifice, because even now when we go to Medina, it's like it's hot and it's wonderful, and we've got 5-star hotels and we've got food and we've got everything, and it's, you know, even now I hear students from Medina University are saying it's hard. Right? So to imagine what it would have been like 40, 50 years ago, it's insane to even
Yeah,
think about it, you know? So
yeah,
very, very
exactly.
inspiring, mashallah. But Sheikh, tell me how, because obviously from then you carried on studying, you carried on learning. Tell me a little bit about how you kind of moved from, you know, that traditional way of learning to becoming like the first place to learn Islam as a university online. Because Islamic Online University, again, another pioneering thing. You were the first guys to do that officially. Like, how did you think even, because you went through a traditional Islamic education with Medina University, like the internet, how did you think about all of that?
Well, you know, I would say that the internet again became an issue of necessity being the mother of invention.
Hmm.
You know, um, after graduating from Medina, doing a master's in Riyadh, which was much more modern, Riyadh University, you know, not King Saud. No, it was King Saud, sorry, but not Imam Ibn Saud University, because there were two major universities there. Imam Ibn Saud was purely Islamic, whereas King Saud had Islamic section, but had, you know, other areas, engineering, medicine, and all these other things. So that was a more modern university. I became a teacher at that time, you know, in Islamic school there in Riyadh, called Manarat Riyadh Schools. Um, uh, when I finished my PhD uh, in, in, um, in Riyadh before I left and went to UAE, then I became a university professor or university lecturer. I lectured in university, taught in university in the American University of Dubai for 10 years. In that time, uh, setting up a department of Islamic studies and, you know, creating curriculum and all these other kinds of things, the challenges that were involved there. That was all on the ground. But what happened was that the internet was now coming into play, late 90s, you know, early 2000. People were writing me and asking me about where they could study online. And the main university, which was mentioned, you mentioned that we are the first. We're not the first.
Okay.
Right? But we're among the first. Or we could say the first, which is truly on Quran and Sunnah. Right? Because there was a website called Sunni Path. And people would write me emails and ask me, what about Sunni Path? Can we study there? So when I went to Sunni Path and I looked at their program, I realized that it was really Sufi path as opposed to Sunni path. It was focused on the Sufi approach to Islam as a whole. There were fiqh courses, there were hadith courses, and so on. So I would advise them that I didn't want to say to them, don't go there, because there was nothing else. You know, and to just say to people, no, don't go means don't get that. No, instead, I encouraged them. I said, look, okay, go, you can deal with your fiqh there. You know, go ahead, you can do your hadith there. You know, but the aqidah, my advice is stay away from the aqidah. Learn your aqidah in your local areas, from your local scholars, you know, because there are issues there. But the fiqh, you know, basically the damage in fiqh is minor. The damage in hadith is minor. You know, the major area, you know, where the damage would be in the area of aqidah. So I realized I couldn't keep saying this. You know, we have to find an alternative. This is what it came down to. So in the year 2000, I first tried to set up an alternative. I engaged my son, who was studying IT at the time, to set up, the necessary programming and programs and systems, etc. But he was in the early stages of his studies. So what he set up, we quickly outgrew, and we didn't have an alternative, and the system was starting to crash. So we had to shut it down. It ran for about a year. It's about the year 2000, 2001. We ran it for about a year. But I knew it needed to be done. The systems that we needed, learning management systems, the video conferencing, these at those days were extremely expensive. You're talking about $60,000, $80,000.
Wow.
It was massive numbers. We just, as much as I wanted to do it, it just burned my hands. I just didn't have that kind of money. I didn't know anybody who would be willing to invest in that kind of money. So, I had to just leave it until basically about 6 years later, my son, by then I had moved to Qatar. My son contacted me and said, the learning management system is now available. Let's do it. Alhamdulillah. And then within that same year, the video conferencing, WYSIQ, now available, free. Oh, mashallah, alhamdulillah. Then we started the process of setting things up. So the need and the intention was there. We didn't have the financial means to. So in between that same period, I set up a department for Islamic studies in Ajman, Preston University in Ajman. And alhamdulillah, that developed now an English medium curriculum. So that was I was writing during that point, the late 90s, early 2000. I was now writing books which would be useful for English Islamic studies programs, because I recognize, the Arabic, pure Arabic, where people come and study everything in Arabic, they go back home and they teach in their local languages. So all that effort made in Arabic becomes lost, When you talk to those people 10 years later, 15 years later, they're struggling to be able to speak the Arabic. And, so I questioned the amount of time that was being put in. I think the Arabic is critical, but somehow I felt that it was better to put it simultaneously, that you're learning in your local language and you learn Arabic at the same time. So the learning of Arabic doesn't delay your studies, because many people were spending 2 to 3 years studying Arabic. Then they had to do 4 years to do a bachelor, then another, 4 for masters, because in Medina it was like 4, and then a PhD, which would be like 5. Oh, you're going close to 15 years, just to get a PhD. So it was just not practical. So, having taught now in university, I could see, that a Western-styled university, the need to, customize and to summarize and to present this material in a more concise way. So that was the learning period for me to prepare for setting up the university online practically. So on the ground, I did as much as I could on the ground, setting up departments. I also started an Islamic studies program in Qatar. By then I'd moved to Qatar. I also went to India and set up in Chennai the first accredited Islamic University of India.
Wow, didn't know that.
Yeah, that's the first. That, you mentioned the internet university as the first. No, that wasn't the first, but this one was the first accredited Islamic university in India. It's not the first Islamic university. There are many. In fact, Islamic universities in India, there are thousands. I mean, and Islamic university, just really means high school. In many of these, right? There's not really university. They just use the term, Jamia Islamia. They use that term very loosely. But anyway, the point is that after launching that university in India, and then, wanting to develop, because the idea of that university in India was to develop for India an international Islamic university, like you have in Islamabad, you have it in Kuala Lumpur, you have it in Kampala, Uganda, you have it in Dhaka, Bangladesh, but you don't have it in India. With the largest individual Muslim population of any of these countries, doesn't exist. Aligarh was just a joke. It was not. Although people think of Aligarh Muslim University, it's not Muslim university. Really. Even the founder, he had all kinds of issues in his aqidah, and there are all kinds of issues there. It wasn't, and it isn't. So they needed this. But what I found, after trying to establish that international Islamic university there in Chennai, the authorities understood what I was trying to do.
Right.
So they made sure it didn't happen. By one, international professors. I was trying to bring them from no visas available.
Oh, okay.
International students. Students were going to embassies, local Indian embassies in their countries, and the people in the embassies were telling them, that isn't a university. It's fake. So we had these kind of struggles. There was a deliberate attempt to confine the university just to India. So even understanding that, okay, that this is the way it's got to be, I found teachers from different parts of India. I didn't want it to just be a Chennai Islamic University. I wanted it to be at least a national Indian Islamic University. And I also went to all the major cities across the country, Bangalore, Mumbai, Hyderabad, etc., etc. I went to, and I invited students to come. So the student body was a mixture from all over India. So at least, they would get to know each other, and understand the unity of the Ummah, the importance, etc. So I did that. I also launched an Islamic school from kindergarten to grade 12, prepared the staff and the faculty and the administration, etc., from an Islamic perspective, what is required. And, after I reached that point, everything was rolling. Then time for renewal of my visa, and it didn't get renewed.
Oh, okay.
That was the final straw, final stroke to try to cut it, make it, fail. So I had to go back to Qatar. And alhamdulillah, it was turned over to others, and it's still going. They're still producing hundreds of graduates. Yeah, it's still ongoing, but it didn't reach notoriety. It didn't reach, the rest of the Muslim world. It was just limited. And still students are coming from different parts of India and studying there. But the goal wasn't achieved. I couldn't achieve that goal there. So that's the point at which I decided to go online.
Okay.
Then I had already decided to go online from back in 2000, but didn't have the means or whatever. When we finally got the means, we started, because 2007, we started the Islamic Online University as a free diploma people can come and study anything, courses that we made available to them for free, no charges at all. Wow. So we were there learning from 2007 to 2010. We were learning how to run a university online, right? So 2010, that's when my visa was not renewed from India. That's when I decided to go fully online with the bachelor's program in Islamic Studies. I should say that before that, I started it on the ground in Qatar.
Okay.
You know, from 2007, basically, when I went online with the free program, on the ground, we did start a bachelor's in Dawah on the ground in Qatar, using the facilities of the Qatar Guest Center. We started it based on the curriculum from the College of Dawah in Durman University in Sudan. I'd gone there. I was made a professor in their teaching staff there, connected to their Department of Dawah, and devised a Dawah program in English, which they needed because their Dawah school was producing graduates who didn't know English, because everything was studied in Arabic.
Right, okay.
But the goal of the department was that the graduates would go to the South and would spread Islam to the people of the South, whether in the North when they came from the South, or they'd go to the South and stay down there and teach down there. But they didn't know English. So it was just really an exercise in futility, you know, preaching to the converted, as they say. So I brought this argument to them. So they said, okay, produce something for us in English. So I put the curriculum together. This is, again, necessity being the mother of invention, you know, and produced the curriculum there and implemented it there in Qatar, you know, on the ground. So what I did is, from the time I started, and we started with one class, because I couldn't get a college. I tried to start a college of Dawah there in Qatar, but I wasn't able. You know, the systems didn't allow it set up. The Sheikh Eid that I was working with, they liked the idea and everything, and it was based on the idea that we estimated about 20,000 people accepting Islam every year in the Gulf. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, you know, Bahrain, UAE, Oman, Qatar, about 20,000. But we're not benefiting from them. They accept Islam, they're given some basics, and, you know, some of them go back to Christianity when they go back home to their countries, etc. You know, we weren't getting out of it, you know, something that we could build with the future. So I suggested we start, you know, rather than a regular Dawah center, we needed a college, a Dawah college for these graduates. Taking out of them those who will be interested in study, training them, then they go back home, or then they go to, you know, Dawah centers around the Gulf where they're fully, you know, equipped to do the Dawah effectively. So that was the intent. But from the beginning of the course, I brought a camera into the classroom, and for all the professors, their lectures were being recorded with the intention of putting it online, you know, once we completed the course. Chennai happened, and because I couldn't continue there, I prematurely started in 2010 the degree course, Bachelor's of Arts in Islamic Studies. So that's, you know, how I ended up in that circumstance of the online university actually teaching Sharia or Islamic studies completely online.
Amazing, alhamdulillah. Sheikh, you know, I could speak to you all day, but we're fast running out of time. But I want to address two really important points, right? And this will be like the last kind of question I've got for you. But it's a two-part question, okay? Because something you keep saying is Zarurat ijad ki maa hai. What that means is necessity is the mother of all invention. My mum used to say that to me as well as a child, right? So the two-part question I've got for you is, one is, yes, you're right, necessity is the mother of invention. Necessity is always there. But you see, what I feel is like you've got this element where you make that necessity your necessity. Because everyone else in the world sees the necessity, but you're like, this is a necessity and I've got to do something about it. So I want you to understand, like, what's the mindset that makes you do that rather than just leaving it to everyone else like everyone else does. And for me, like, this is the kind of thing that I see when I think about leadership. And so that's one part of the question, really understanding your psychology and your thinking of why do you have to make this your thing as opposed to just letting someone else get on with it. And the second one I wanted to ask you about is just generally around leadership and how, you know, we have kind of, it feels like a contradictory relationship in Islam with leadership, where on one hand we're like, don't go for leadership, don't put yourself forward for leadership, and on the other hand the Prophet is saying every one of you is a leader. So these two things I really want to kind of you to address in the last kind of question and answer. That would be really great.
Okay, and I should say that a good bit, maybe about 50% of what you were just saying in the last few minutes, I wasn't able to hear.
Okay.
The connection somehow got stuck, so I missed out. But I got the gist of what you're getting at. You know, one, why the necessity became a necessity for me personally.
Yes.
Yeah. And the other one was, what is it again now? About
the other one is about the contradiction,
leadership.
the apparent contradiction.
You know, whether we should seek leadership or, as we have been told, we should leadership. You know, so where does whatever leadership things I was involved in fit in with that?
Yeah, and it's like trying to educate us.
So
on
I'll take the first one.
Yeah, exactly. Educate on us on the sense that, you know, when it comes to leadership, we shouldn't seek leadership. But then the Prophet is telling us, you know, every one of you is a shepherd. So the kind of the oxymoron between the two, I guess.
Okay, the first part, and that is why it became a necessity for me, because Allah made it a necessity for me. Because of the goal that I was seeking to achieve, a necessity came up for me to achieve that goal. So I had no choice. If I didn't take on the demands of this necessity, then the goal which I sought, I wouldn't be able to achieve. So it was relatively simple. It wasn't a matter that there was a necessity out there which was not necessarily connected to me. And then, you know, I took it upon myself. I said, let me go deal with that necessity, and let me go deal with this other one necessity. No. Every time Allah created that necessity and put me in that situation. You know, I wasn't a writer. I was an artist. I was into art. I was planning to go to art school, and, you know, I was very much into, you know, colors and drawings and, you know, this kind of thing. That's where I was. My head was not writing. But after graduating from Medina, I was asked to take over the teaching of Islamic studies in that school. There were no books at that time, 1980. There were no books on Islam that could teach you from, you know, now we have Molvi Abdulaziz, and, you know, we have the series from Riyadh, and they have a number of different books that are out there. Then there was nothing, absolute zero. So I had to write. That was the necessity. How am I going to teach without preparing things for the students? I had to. So, you know, Allah put me in that situation, but alhamdulillah, He also put the means to fulfill it there too. Because my father was an English expert, you know, masters in English, and, you know, having taught English for 30, 40 years, whatever. You know, so he was a guide for me, you know. Even when I tell people my book, The Evolution of Fiqh, the last chapter was written by my father.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know that.
As a non-Muslim.
Okay, amazing.
As a non-Muslim. He accepted Islam later, but at the time when he did it, he was a non-Muslim.
Amazing.
You know, he was helping me edit the book and, you know, prepare it for publication. And he wrote that last chapter for me. I mentioned it in the introduction. Most people don't read the introductions.
Yeah.
So maybe why you don't know. But I mentioned it, right? But that was, you know, because it's still in the process of learning how to write.
Okay.
I wasn't a writer, as I said. I didn't have that inclination, you know. I took notes, copious notes. I can say, you know, so as a note taker, yeah. You know, when I first became a Muslim, every book that I read, I used to write the summary of all of the ideas of those books. So if I want to go back over, I didn't have to go read the whole book again. I could just go back to the main key and critical concepts which were in the book. So I was in the habit of doing that, note-taking. But writing per se, no. So that circumstance forced me, you know. And there were no books available on Aqidah.
Yeah.
The only thing was, you know, Kitab al-Tawheed, which was a training book used by Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab for training his teachers, you know, giving them the course material that they would deliver. It wasn't meant to be a book to be studied by itself.
Yeah.
That's why you have all the commentaries on it. And that's what we studied. But there was nothing, no commentaries available in English, you know. So that book by itself is just like, who reads it? You know, who read it? You know, maybe you read a few pages. There was nothing. So this is why I felt the necessity of writing, for example, the fundamentals of Tawheed. Because there was nothing with that commentary type approach. So, it's in the same way, each of the necessities came up for me, which required me to act on. Whether it was in dawah, I knew there was an aspect of the dawah where there was a weakness, there was a shortage, no books, so and so. I felt it was my duty to provide that information for English speakers, etc. You know? So that was the necessity in front of me. If the dawah was to move forward effectively, we needed to have that. If the college was to be set up, we needed to have textbooks. Yeah. So I wrote on Usul al-Fiqh, Usul al-Hadith, Usul al-Tafsir, etc., because these would be the core books which students would initially study when they went into the systems.
Amazing.
So, as I said, these were necessities which Allah put in front of me, which I had to tackle if I wanted to achieve the goals that I had set, you know, for myself, for effectively conveying that responsibility which the Prophet ﷺ put on each and every one of us when he said, "Ballighu anni walau ayah," convey whatever you've learned, even if it's only a single verse. Now, the other issue of leadership, I think that what is intended from the hadith, or the hadiths which discourage us from seeking leadership, is the scramble for leadership. Okay. Well, you want, I want, he wants, they want, you know, and we're going to be fighting over to get to that thing. Everybody's pushing himself, and, you know, that way is not a good way. Because in that way, you know, you're going to have to buy out people. You have to make compromises and things, you know, which you will be doing, which are not good, fundamentally not good. Even though you might say, my intention is to get there and do the right thing. But if you have to buy out people and do all these other things, you know, it destroys. The way you got there will determine who you are when you get there. You know, so where one finds an opportunity where people have supported and felt that you are most capable for you to say, no, no, I don't want, because I don't want to be seeking leadership. No, no. If the circumstance dictates, shows that in fact you are the person most capable to handle this, then you should embrace it.
Okay.
You should embrace it. Unless you feel, within yourself a kind of weakness where you feel that if I get there, it's going to corrupt me. I'd prefer not to be in that, situation. Then that is a personal choice, and you have the right to make that choice. But otherwise, if you have some level of self-confidence in that sense, that you could do a good job, then, and the people have sought you, have tried to push you forward, then there's no harm in taking the leadership, in that matter. For myself, the leadership, again, was a product of necessity.
Yeah.
If I didn't do it, it wasn't going to get done at that time. Maybe it will be done sometime down the line, but at that time, I needed to do what was necessary to establish the university. And that's how we have, progressed. Looking back in retrospect, we didn't, myself and the team that were with me, we didn't have a plan, a clear plan of university operation with all of its departments, etc., which we followed and just put the blocks in place as things, and circumstances arose, etc. We didn't do that. That's not how it was done. It was more metamorphosing into the various departments as the needs arose, and this is that approach. It means that in the end, you will be a bit confused. Your operation will need fixing.
Yeah.
Will need tightening up. That's how we grew. Would I do it another way? Could I have done it the other way? That's another issue. But we recognize the weaknesses which exist now in the university that we're trying to patch now. We're patching up, fixing up here and there. What caused that? It was because of how we grew. And of course, we're now trying to follow the other model, bring systems from existing universities that are effective, etc., and put them in our midst and adapting ourselves to fit that model which has already been established by many other universities in the world. So that's basically where we are now, putting systems in place, filling up all the gaps that exist as a result of our path that we've taken, and still striving for the correct accreditation for the university. We are facing all kinds of challenges because online education in the third world, which is where we operate mostly, is looked down upon. After Exact company in Pakistan, was shown to have been a degree mill selling millions of dollars of degrees, and then that was online, that was, they didn't even have an existence, physical existence. They were completely virtual, fake, totally, so that was like a big reminder to a lot of the third world countries. That's what can happen to you
if you go online.
So they have a very negative attitude towards online education. So this is what we're struggling with, what we have to overcome, and that's the struggle of the next decade for us to,
and you're ready for it, Sheikh.
Establish ourselves.
You've been struggling for decades, and it sounds like you're ready, mashallah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Inshallah, the life has been a struggle. But with the university, of course, we're just entering into our 10th year. And we have been struggling that whole time. But alhamdulillah, this is, Allah created us in kabad, you know. وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي kabad. So he's created us in struggle. And this is the essence of life. And it's that struggle which brings out the best in us. Absolutely. So it's something, though it may not be, pleasant, it's necessary.
Alhamdulillah.
And we embrace that necessity.
Yeah, Sheikh, it's been an absolutely huge pleasure to spend some time with you, one-to-one, privately. It's been wonderful to go through your journey, and I'm sure that everyone that's been watching, they probably discovered a lot of things about you which they didn't know, and about the journey and everything that you've been on. So, Sheikh, Jazakallah khair, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Barakallahu feekum. It's a wonderful opportunity to share, what we've experienced that others can benefit from, benefit by. And, as the Prophet ﷺ had said, Ad-dal al-khair kafa'ili. One who guides others to good is like the one who does the good. So if whatever people take out of what I've shared, as guidance for them and ideas, concepts, direction, focus, alhamdulillah, that's wonderful. That's rewards for me. And, I try to maintain that Sheikh bin Baz's openness, to share with whoever, whether it's, your program or other programs. People ask me all the time, and, others will tell me, brother, you don't have time for that, but, and it's true. Sometimes I really don't have time for it. But, the point is that to try to reach out and to share, is very, very important for Muslims, everybody, but for Muslims particularly in these times, where we do need to work more closely together to be able to be in the forefront of the awakening, which began some decades ago. Alhamdulillah, we're still with that wave, and we say Allahu Akbar, and inshallah Allah will make happen what needs to happen.
Inshallah. Barakallahu feek, Sheikh. You've been very, very generous with your time. Brothers and sisters, this is the Muslim CEO show. I hope you guys enjoyed the show, and I hope you'll go and check out Islamic Online University. Some amazing courses out there. No matter where you are from in the world, go check it out. And if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe to the show and check out the free training at muslimceo.com. Once again, Jazakumullah khair to everyone watching, and Sheikh, it's been an absolute wonderful pleasure. Thank you so much, and inshallah we'll see you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.